Start streaming. And hey, look at that. We're live with Hosted Bar with Erin Ogden, and we have a guest, Cynthia Del'Aria.
Yay!
Cynthia, welcome. I hope I didn't butcher your last name
Thank
too
you.
much.
It was
Excellent,
perfect.
excellent,
Absolutely
excellent.
perfect.
I appreciate that. I always try to get it right, even if I'm just guessing. So welcome to Hosted Bar with us. I'll let Erin take over some of the introductory materials, and then we'll get underway.
Well,
Yay.
first is, of course, that you are Jeff Glazer, and I'm Erin Ogden,
Usually.
and we're here every week. But Cynthia is not. So, Cynthia and I know each other because we're part of a group about women business owners who are dynamic and just essentially amazing women and amazing business owners, which, of course, Cynthia inhabits well. But she also works with a lot of startups. So what we were when we were talking the other day, she was saying how entrepreneurship is not for the faint of heart, and I thought that is a perfect episode. Um, so, Cynthia, why don't you tell us a little bit who you are,
Yep.
what Precursor is, and what you do, and then I also know that you have a very exciting drink to share with us.
I
So,
do.
tell us what you're drinking today.
I am Cynthia Del'Aria, and I'm the CEO and founder of Precursor. And my passion is helping new tech entrepreneurs, new startuppers figure out which of their ideas has the best shot at viability so that they can focus their time and energy on that. Because
De-risking, my favorite subject in the entire
de-risking.
universe.
Yes, because my favorite statistic and my least favorite statistic are the exact same one, which is that in 2018, Crunchbase did a postmortem on like 200 startups, and they found that the number one reason that those startups failed that year was because nobody wanted what they were building. And that's a preventable problem. It wasn't about money, it wasn't about the teams, it was about they didn't have product market fit. And so that is my whole mission in life. And Precursor is an AI driven and data driven platform that allows people to go through this process, figure out product market fit, go into how do you grow, how do you scale, and eventually how do you exit, like the whole life cycle of a startup in a way that is much less expensive than working with a consultant like me. So that's super fun. It's targeted for launch in September. Obviously, I've been working with entrepreneurs one-on-one for many, many years, and I have a lot of data backing up the work that we're doing, but really, really excited about that. And as Erin said, I am drinking good old-fashioned electrolyte-rich water because I got kicked out of my office today because we have contractors that are doing a bunch of work and they screwed up the electric and the internet. So I had to like run down to my podcasting room. And so that's where I am. And there's no scotch here. So later there will be probably a 21-year Balvenie in my future. That's what I'm thinking.
Very
So
nice.
yeah,
Excellent.
I like it.
Excellent. I mean, smart
all
water is
single
always
malt all
good
the
too.
time. Yeah, exactly. Because it makes me feel smarter. I don't know what it is. Like everybody always teases me, but the electrolytes, I really feel like they make it really smooth. Like it feels good in your mouth and
The umami.
makes fun of me. Umami, exactly. Like anybody would even know what that is. I'm gonna come up with one of those one day. You'll see.
Right. So I like to think of it as getting you ready for scotch, right? You got to pre-hydrate.
Exactly.
Ready
That's
to
right. That's
all part
right.
of the plan.
That's
How about you,
exactly
Jeff?
right.
What are you drinking
Yeah, well, I
today?
don't have my smart water pre-scotch warm-up. Um, but today I am drinking Three Floyd's Wig Splitter Coffee Stout, 2019, aged 2 years. Nice, dark, big, black, bold stout because nothing says 90-degree summer days like coffee stout.
I was going to mention, like, it's 90
I
degrees
know.
out, and you're like, you know what I need is a
I know,
coffee
because
stout.
I'm the crazy weirdo that like ages IPAs and drinks stouts when it's 90 degrees outside.
So wait, stout is like a type of beer,
Mhm.
yes?
Yes.
Yes.
And they aged that?
Oh, yeah,
I didn't
for
realize
sure.
that beer or stouts or lagers were aged.
Well, so
Well, film
stout is
people age
not a
them.
lager. Stout is an
Okay.
ale. I mean, so we could spend the remaining 30 minutes
Oh.
talking about all of this.
Yeah,
Um, I'll
we need
keep
to
it
move on.
short and just say that yes, you can age beer. It ages much like wine does. Um, it gets mellower and more complex over time. Um,
Huh.
and so stouts are excellent beers to age because they don't have a lot of hop character. They don't have, there's significant roasty character. Maybe avoid the hop controversy in aging. But stouts age very well. So anybody out there that's interested in aging beer, start with a stout. Kind of easy place to start. But yeah, I have quite a cellar
Fascinating.
downstairs.
That is fascinating. I'm a celiac, so mostly I can't drink any of that stuff,
Fair.
but that's fascinating. And
So we have
gluten-free beer, let's just be honest,
Some of
sucks.
it does.
it mostly does.
There's some very good gluten-free manufacturers. We have one here in Madison called Alt Brew, which is
Alt
called
brew?
Alt Brew, as in
Okay.
alternative brew.
Awesome.
It's really good. And the nice thing about Alt Brew, what I love about Trevor and Maureen, who are the owners, Trevor's the head brewer. A lot of times, the reason why you don't like gluten-free beer is because
Yeah.
usually they try to make like a regular beer style, and then they do one of two things. They either remove the gluten, which isn't very good
Yes.
and sort of doesn't make it like as a celiac, that's not a useful procedure for you because it doesn't
No.
remove enough gluten to make your life less miserable.
Oh,
And so gluten removed beer is basically non-functional for celiac,
for everyone.
and it removes a lot of the taste. And then the other
Right.
alternative is that they use a gluten-free grain like sorghum, but they only use
Okay.
sorghum, and they just
That's why
substitute
the Weissel
it.
tire.
They just substitute
Yeah.
it for a regular grain bill. They don't build the beer profile around the character of the grain. And Trevor,
Got it.
who's a wonderful brewer for Alt Brew, starts with the flavor profile of the gluten-free grain. So he uses more than just sorghum, uses a variety of gluten-free grains. His wife is celiac, which is why he started the brewery to begin with. They brew
I
in
love
an,
this
they
already.
brew in an entirely like airtight facility where they don't let any gluten in. And then
Wow.
they brew the beer to the flavor profile of the gluten-free grain. So that way, the beer
Ah,
actually tastes good. And
that's
to this
awesome.
day, their beer
It
is
is.
honestly the only gluten-free beer I've had that that I can say I actually enjoy.
You can drink it and not tell someone it's gluten free, and they would never know.
See,
They
I
would.
love that. Okay, I'm gonna check that out. I gotta check that out because
Speaking of, a product with a right audience, he knew his audience because Brian was not afraid to tell him his audience,
yeah,
Yeah.
and he
useful
just
when your wife is your audience.
right, and they just embrace it, and they do a fabulous job.
That is awesome. Okay,
Where
pro tip. Thank
Yeah.
you.
whereas I am drinking a Drunken Saint.
Nice.
So
See, I totally thought you were gonna say drunken sailor.
no, Drunken Saint because it has Pimm's and an elderflower liqueur in it.
Saint
Ooh,
Germain.
nice. Saint
Saint
Germain.
Germain, hence the
Saint
Drunken
Germain and a little prosecco.
Saint. So our
Yeah.
friend Joseph Beckman is the bar czar. He's a mixologist, and so he made this drink for another friend of ours who's raising money for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. And they did a mixology event, and so he took us through and taught us 4 different drinks, and all of the money went to cancer research and things like that. So like I got to
Wow.
feel good about
Love that.
learning new drinks, right?
Oh, I love that.
And so and Tara is actually a pretty consistent listener of and watcher of our series. So if anyone's out there, you can still donate to her thing tonight. I think today's the last day. But Joseph hit it out of the park with 4 different drinks, including the Drunken Saint, which I told him I was going to drink too much of throughout the summer. And I am
living up to
Definitely
that.
proving true to my word.
I love it. I love it.
So, now that we've covered beer and gluten-free and all of that, I really want to get to like entrepreneurship and how it is so exciting and it's fabulous, but it is not for the faint of heart.
Yes, that's
Right?
true.
It is not something you just take on lightly. And you touched on this a little bit about your, kind of your favorite um, statistic. But I guess one question I have is a lot of times people are really focused on the product and what it is.
Mm.
But I wonder, is it a good product that's important, or is it a good team,
Well, actually,
or something else?
both of those things are really important. But what's actually most important is what's the problem you're solving? How painful is the problem? Who are you solving it for? And will they change their habits or spend money in order to solve it in your way? So, how do they resonate with your solution, right? None of what I just said speaks to a team or a product for that matter, right? So, the very first thing you have to do is understand what's the problem you're solving, why is it important, and then talk to people who have it. Because one of the things that we see a lot of times is people say, oh my gosh, this is such a huge problem, and this app is going to fix it, and it's going to do XYZ thing, and they're building out their features, and they even have great people behind them, right? They got a great team, but they never talk to users. And if they would have done that, they would have found out that for the average end user, it's not that big of a deal. And they've got a workaround, or they have, a pen and paper, and that works great for them. And they just don't care. It's not high enough friction in their lives that it's worth changing their habit and spending money to do something different. So that is really the crux of product market fit. And once you have that, then the next most important thing is your team. Team is absolutely, if product market fit is a given and you know that there's a market for what you're trying to do, your team is absolutely the most important thing, because nothing happens without execution. And what it takes to execute is a good team. Humans are the ones who do the executing part. So, so it's a little bit neither of those and a little bit team.
I think that's fair. I think a lot of thing is that good product is, it doesn't matter how good you can have the best working thingamajig, but if nobody cares, nobody cares.
Nobody cares. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And that was the thing that they found when they did the study that I referenced earlier, is a lot of these companies had amazing teams and amazing culture, and they raised so much money, and their products were like, they were gorgeous and they were so easy to use, but nobody cared. It just wasn't the kind of problem. They were solving the wrong problem, which is eventually why they failed. So
I do a lot of work with entrepreneurs, and one of the things I think entrepreneurs consistently underestimate is the customer.
Yes.
And they almost always take too generalized approach to customer discovery and customer identity, right? Where they say, anybody that has an iPod, or nobody has iPods anymore, but anybody that has an iPhone is a target user. Like, no, that's not really the right way to think about it. But maybe that's eventually your market, but your customer is the person who cares. Is the person whose problem you are solving. So go find somebody with that problem and solve their problem. And what we often find is that the best ideas rarely survive the first customer, right? Because you put it in front of somebody who actually has the problem, and they will tell you immediately whether it's worthwhile or not. But it needs to be a stranger, and it needs to be a person who actually has the problem. And once you have those two things,
I can't just go ask
they
my
will
mom?
absolutely tell you how to solve the problem, or they will tell you whether this is a good fit for the solution or not.
That's right. Yeah, your mom's not a good option there, Erin. Your mom loves you. She wants you to be successful. She believes in you no matter what. But you would be surprised the number of entrepreneurs I work with who are like, well, when I first start working with them, I'm like, okay, how many people have you talked to who have the problem? Well, I mean, I'm in stealth mode because I don't want somebody to steal it. But my family and my friends know, and they think it's really great. And I'm like, yeah, stealth mode isn't your problem.
NSF,
That's never going to be your problem.
NSF's accelerator program that they sponsor requires entrepreneurs who are in the program to go out and interview 100 people. And I talk to entrepreneurs about doing it, and they're like, 100 people, how hard is that? Yeah, well, go interview 20 of them, and then realize you have to interview 80 more.
80 more. Yep, you're a fifth of the way there. That's exactly right. A lot of the people. So depending on what industry people are dealing with and whether they're B2B or direct to consumer, depending on what they're doing will kind of give me the gauge for how many I want them to have. But it's not unusual for me to ask for 100 to 150 in order to get, because you haven't even gotten good data until you get to at least 80 or 100 in most cases, to be able to see what trends and patterns are really emerging. So yeah, I feel like you're exactly right that the customer is deprioritized in a lot of founders' plans and execution and everything. And it's a little bit about ego, but it's also a little bit about they just didn't know. Like they assume, well, I had the problem, or I perceive the problem, or I know someone who had the problem. And so that must mean it exists universally and that, this really needs to be solved. And they never stop to get out of the myopic view that they have of the world. And the biggest challenge that I have when teaching people how to do user validation and problem validation is you don't talk. You ask open-ended questions and be as unbiased as possible, and then you listen.
Yeah, the
And
unbiased part is really hard.
it is, because naturally what happens, so I do a lot of work with people to craft unbiased questions, because ultimately they try and insert, well, but I want to know specifically about this. And I'm like, I get that, but if that's really important, it will come
For
out
sure.
in one of these three questions without you introducing it. Because ultimately, most people are people
Yeah.
pleasers, right? Like they want to, if they're getting cues from you, visual, verbal, auditory cues from you, that one response or another is going to make you more happy, they're going to tend to lean to the one that's going to make you happy. People hate conflict, right? Whereas if you are presenting a face of, I'm open and I want to know your opinion and I have no opinions or judgment or preconceived notions about any of it, they will feel very connected and very comfortable saying what's real for them. You know
For
what I
sure.
mean? So yeah.
Yeah, one of the sorry, Erin, I'm sort of taking over the questions here,
No, I
but
was just going to say that you do a lot more work with the early startups, so I'm going to sit here and like nod along and listen to you guys. You are on the same
well, I
wavelength.
mean, yeah, I mean, I could talk customer discovery all day. Like this idea of product
Yep.
market fit and customer discovery and value
Yes.
propositions and like all of this is like this is
Yes.
where I spend a lot of my life. And one of the things I think you've hit on, one of the really hard parts about customer discovery is sort of the assumptions that the entrepreneurs bring. Even sort of stepping back a little bit, one of the problems that seems to be is that a product is sort of born out of imagination, and everybody's so
Hmm.
proud of their, I don't know, I never know what to call it. I just call it a mental baby, but that's a bad
Yeah.
I've been told that's a bad phrase because it's really disturbing. But but
I like it. I'm totally going to
they have
use
these
it.
mental babies, and they want to go out and show it to everybody and say, look how cute
Yeah.
my mental baby is, and nobody wants to tell them that their baby is ugly, right? And
Yeah.
we get so caught up in
Yes.
thinking how cool we are for having invented this thing
Yes.
that we never
Yeah.
that it doesn't occur to us that nobody cares.
Well,
Yeah.
my favorite is that you have a solution that you're trying to find the problem, right? Like
Oh
you have
my
a cool
gosh.
technology, and so I just have to find the problem, and you're not listening
Yeah.
to the industry or the people. I'm dealing with this right now,
Yeah.
and like, but what you're trying to do isn't going to work, and the way that you're going about it is actually going to turn people off.
Yeah. It's actually interesting. So I always tell the story of Doug, and Doug is not actually his
Yeah.
name, but I have a lot of respect for him. But the rest of the story is absolutely true, and it illustrates this entirely, which is Doug had a great idea for an app. He was a retired guy in his late 50s. His house was paid for. His retirement was settled. Like, he retired from corporate life, and he was like, I had this great idea. And he convinced his wife, like, we'll take a $250,000 mortgage on the house. And in a couple of years, we'll be millionaires. It'll be fine. So over the course of 4.5 years, he ended up leveraging from their personal assets $500,000 and never got more than 2 or 3 people signed up and paying on his platform ever. And he put a lot of money into marketing and advertising, right? And his wife ended up divorcing him and taking the house because she was so mad because he kept saying, just another $50,000, just another $25,000. And he nickeled and dimed her to death. And so here he is 4.5 years later, 500 grand in, sitting across the table. And he's like, can you help me find someone, can you help me find a market? And I was like, oh, like, it's just heartbreaking, right? Because I'm like, where you should have found me 4.5 years ago when we could have prevented this whole thing.
$450,000 ago would have been the right time to contact me. Yeah, that's right.
Oh man, but it's exactly what you're saying, right? They're a product looking for a market rather than a human looking for a solution, right? And again, to your point, it's the mental baby thing, right? And this is why this is the stealth mode myth that I talk about all the time, which is you hiding your light under a bushel isn't protecting your mental baby, it's killing it slowly in the dark.
With CO2 emissions from the flame.
Yeah. So, you have to get in the world of your ideal end user. And the other thing that I see a lot is people are afraid to niche down. It's like they're too broad. To your point, everybody who's an iPhone user, could be maybe eventually, but right now you need to get so specific that in your marketing, people hear themselves. They hear their persistent complaints. They hear their challenges. They hear the way that they would talk about it, because then that's how it starts to spread beyond your initial niche. But niching down is actually the key to building something bigger than what you think.
And this is...
Well, it's interesting because I know... Sorry, I was say one of the things that I often hear, they're like, but then I'm missing out the people that aren't in that niche.
You're not, though.
That they're gonna do that.
You would rather have one.
People. What do
you would rather have one good user than 10 shitty users.
That's right.
And
that's exactly right.
One of the sort of the mental things that I have some entrepreneurs walk through when I talk to them is, I don't care who all the users are. If you were to walk out onto the street and pick one person to use your thing, who's the one person you would pick?
That's exactly right.
Who's that one? Because you can't have 10 users until you have one user. So get one user that actually has the problem is going to be way more beneficial than 10 people who don't care.
And you can nail that problem for every single person who is like that person, right? I mean, totally.
Customize
100%.
the solution to that person. Because if that person is having the problem, there are other people that have it. And they probably know other people who have the problem. And if your solution is good enough, they're going to tell those people that, hey, all the people with this problem, we've figured out how to solve the problem. And then they become an acolyte and they become marketing for you.
That's right. Like brand ambassadors, just people out there singing your praises all the time.
Yeah.
I want them to remember something. If I'm everything, they won't remember me at all. At least they remember me for something.
That's right. Because if people don't hear themselves in what you're doing or what you're saying, it's not memorable. And you can always expand to new markets and new user personas and new areas and new marketing campaigns and whatever. But if you don't nail one to begin with, then there's nowhere to go, Yeah.
Yeah, and then that iteration and adding people to it and building out from the one person is sort of the step that everybody wants to skip. Everybody just wants to go to having 100 users, and nobody wants to have 2 users. 2 users that are good. And I mean, a lot of people have 2 users that are terrible, but everybody sort of wants to skip that step.
It's one of those things where, you know, we talk so much about user validation and talking to customers and doing interviews, and people are always like, we get to, I'm putting quotes around the end of the first phase of that, and before we get into solution validation and then, you know, into actually doing a launch and whatever. And they're always like, their face falls a little bit when I say, this process, you should be doing it all the time. Like, talk to your 20 best customers who love you. Talk to your 20 worst customers who you've struggled to keep. Talk to 20 people who canceled your service, and then talk to 20 people who never signed up for it in the first place.
Yeah.
And find out what all of them say, because that is how you build better customer retention. You reduce your churn, your customer satisfaction will go up. This is a process you're always doing, because you're not, again, this is where it kind of comes back to the ego piece. We're not building a startup so that you can be Mark Zuckerberg, right? We're building a startup so that people's problems get solved and their lives get better because of it. If you're doing it for any other reason, I don't know how you'd be successful.
Believe it or not,
that,
Zuckerberg started with that premise.
He totally did. He totally did. I mean, Elon Musk is another one that people like to use. Oh, well, he's just a brilliant genius in a lab. I'm like, yeah, who's spent the last 22 years trying to solve the space travel problem.
Right.
Like, and he's done other cool stuff along the way, right?
You know, he only built an electric car. You know, when electric cars didn't exist.
A 100 out of 100 on Consumer Reports, by the way, the new Plaid, what is it, the Plaid Model M or something like that? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Crazy.
Crazy. I guess, you know, since we have you here, one of my favorite questions, or one of my favorite subjects, I guess. What are some favorite tactics that you have for customer discovery, customer validation? It used to be all the rage. A/B testing was all the rage. Maybe a few years ago. It seems A/B testing has gotten more sophisticated, and now it's more like A, B, C, D, E, F, G testing. But because we can run multiple experiments in parallel or whatever.
Sure.
But any kind of favorite new tactics that you're using for validation?
Yep, it's an oldie, and nothing is like it. It's called having a conversation. Like, we can put a lot of tech in between, but in order to get the kind of information we need and the kind of information we're really looking for, good old-fashioned talking to people is the best way I know how to do it. You know, A/B testing is really great, and I use it a lot when I have a sense for where the market might want to go, and I can kind of test some nuance inside of some things. And A/B testing will sometimes get better at behavior and actual conversion and things like that. But I like good old-fashioned conversations, asking open-ended questions, and then listening to what people say. Yeah, that's my jam right there.
And how do you find people? Like, I know, you know, for all the entrepreneurs that may be listening, right? I mean, one of the questions we always get is, well, how do I find people? Like, how do I contact a competitor? You know, to ask them, how do I find random strangers who have the problem? How do I contact my suppliers or vendors or whatever?
Yep. Yeah, so it totally depends on what kind of problem you're solving and who your target market might be. So, like, for example, if I'm working with somebody who's building something that's D2C, that, you know, you could pull random people off the street, have a 15-minute conversation, and it would be valuable. I love sitting right outside of a Starbucks on like a main drag somewhere with just a stack of $15 Starbucks gift cards. People go wild for that stuff. I don't know what it is about Starbucks. I think they put cocaine in it or something, but people go nuts for it, right? So $15 Starbucks
Coke of coffee.
For totally,
I think that's
right?
their new marketing slogan.
Yeah. And so for D2C, and depending on how wide, you know, your market might be, that could work really, really well. And then you just design an interview that fits in 10 to 15 minutes. If you need to get more targeted, I love using groups on LinkedIn and groups on Facebook, finding people who already have a group of people that are in your niche or in your target market, and reaching out to the owners of those groups and saying, I'm happy to compensate you, but I'd love to get some opinions from some people in your groups. Would you be willing to do a couple posts over the next 2 weeks with a Calendly link where people can schedule a time to talk to me? I'll offer them an incentive. That gets a lot more traction than you would guess. And then there actually are services out there now. One is called respondent.io, which I use all the time. I love their model. The other one is called userinterviews.com. And they have databases of people who you put out what you're looking for, and they will notify people who match your qualifications. And then you can pick the ones you like based on, you can ask them to fill out like qualifier questions if they're interested in talking to you. And so between those three things, and then at the end of every interview, I always ask whoever I'm talking to, now that we've had a conversation, is there someone else that you know that I should be talking to that you would introduce me to? And that bears more fruit. You'll double the amount of interviews you can do just by asking that question alone.
I think one of the questions I was having is like, we were talking before we got on that we can chat with people, right?
Mm-hmm.
We might recharge alone, but put us in a room, we'll talk to everybody, right?
That's right.
But that's not everyone. Like
No.
Jeff, for example, is not that guy.
Yep.
You put him in a room and for an hour, come back, you ask him how many people to talk to, he's like the bartender.
Yeah.
And so that go out and ask, I can see how that can be a real hurdle.
Sure.
For a lot of startups. So it's good to know that there are options for those.
Yes.
And I feel like the groups thing is even a little bit less of a hurdle. Like there are very few people on earth that could be in front of a Starbucks and be like, hey, let's do this.
Yeah.
For those that can't, it's great.
Yeah.
But there are a lot, like, Jeff, could you imagine doing that if you were, for you personally?
So can I imagine doing it? Yes, because I have done it. Believe it or not, I have a master's in marketing data research.
Yeah, but
so I
that
have
you
done
can
it.
even,
But yes, it is very uncomfortable. But I'll tell you a really weird story about Jeff is that when he was in high school, he and his friends, I don't know why I'm talking about myself in the third person, but we used to go to the mall and do user surveys to girls we thought were cute. And then we would always end the survey by asking for their phone numbers.
So is that
so I got very used to going.
You're asking me about what I felt about coffee?
Something like that.
Oh my gosh. Well, what's interesting about what you're saying, Erin, is that there's two elements of this that if you're the founder who does get squeamish about this kind of thing, you need to be really honest with yourself. So entrepreneurship's not for the faint of heart. That's the whole context of this, right? So I'm about to lay down some truth that people got to get a little bit honest with themselves about, okay? The first thing is, if you are the founder of a startup, you are going to be pitching. You are the face of your company. You have got to be able to talk about it. You have to be willing to talk to anyone at any time because you never know where your next investor is coming from, or more to the point, where your next big customer is coming from, or where your next strategic partnership is coming from. If that's not you, get a co-founder who has that skill and leverage what is you to create your idea. The other thing is, because you're going to be pitching to investors so much, like 2/3 of your job, the entire time you're running a company like this, is pitching to investors. Get good at rejection early. That's all I can say. Because if you're sitting in front of a group of investors terrified of the rejection piece of it, they're not going to invest in me or whatever that is going to show up in your pitch, and it's going to be that much harder for you to ever land investment, even from people who are like in the back of their mind, they're like going, oh my God, I wish he would just stop saying that thing because I really want to invest, but now I'm freaking out. Like, you have got to get good at rejection. So one of my past clients, he founded a company and spent 6 years building the company, getting investment dollars, getting rejected by investors. Because of the pandemic and COVID last year, his business was based in the travel industry, traveling with your pets. So it was like pet tech, right? And totally, there was no way for him to keep it alive. And it was a thing. So we closed down the company, and like a month later, he had a girlfriend. And I was like, I haven't seen you have a girlfriend in years. What is up? And he goes, I'm just not afraid of rejection anymore. was like, so now I walked into the bar and she was sitting there and I was like, you're hot. What's your deal? And he's like, I just didn't care. If she was like, go away. All right, fine. Like, I've been rejected by a lot more people than that in my life, you know? So.
I love it.
Perfect. Can you believe it's already been a half hour? It's already
I
been 30 minutes.
Crazy.
So your last thing, sorry, Jeff, is there a last thing you got?
Yeah, I was just going to say, so now that we've had a conversation, do you have somebody that we should talk to next?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I have a couple people in mind who would love this.
Awesome.
Excellent. Let us know. We'd love to have them. And then I think that last thing that you point out was perfect in showing that why entrepreneurship isn't for the faint of heart, but that doesn't mean it's not for you. It means just make sure you surround yourself with the right team and go forward, because just because it's not your strong suit doesn't mean it's not somebody's.
That's right. That's exactly right. And having the spirit of, I want to build something that's bigger than myself, and I'm willing to do the work to grow to be the person who can have the bigger thing. That's 99% of the battle right there. If you have that mindset and you're willing to grow and learn, you can get there. I've taught many, many people how to get there.
Awesome.
For sure.
Well, thank you so much, Cynthia. You are always wonderful to talk to, even with electrolyte water instead of a scotch.
I know.